Racist cop breaks blind black woman's cane in public, but has no clue who her son really is. She couldn't see his badge, but she could feel his hate. A blind black woman, a sacred cane, a public act of cruelty no one dared stop. But what that cop didn't know, her son was a federal prosecutor. And what began as humiliation was about to spark a reckoning the whole town would feel. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below, and if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. There's something sacred about mornings in Franklin Square, Georgia. Long before the city's heartbeat kicks in, before horns blare and screens light up, the world here hums in a quieter frequency. The wind tiptoes through sycamore branches. The air is clean, crisp, and touched by magnolia and memory. And most mornings, if you were up early enough, you'd see her. Evelyn Grant. 76 years old, blind since she was 48, and still moving through the world with more grace than most ever find. Wrapped in her faded lavender shawl, cane in hand, she moved like water, smooth, unhurried, intentional. Her footsteps followed a route etched in years of habit down the cracked sidewalk from her modest brick home, past the bakery that always smelled like cinnamon, across the little footbridge that split Franklin Square in two. To the rest of the town, Evelyn was Miss Grant. To some, she was the woman who hummed hymns on park benches and told stories with her hands. But few truly knew her. What she'd seen in her younger days, what she'd survived to still be standing, fewer still knew the quiet strength coiled in her soul like a tightly wound spring, and the name she never wore on her sleeve, mother of Major Jordan Grant, United States Army. But Evelyn never flaunted that. Pride wasn't something you wore in this town. You carried it in your spine, in your silence, in the way you got up every day and kept walking. No matter how many times the world told you to sit down, that morning was no different. The sun had barely crested the horizon, and Evelyn was already buttoning her coat one slow loop at a time. Her fingers found the smooth handle of her cane, the one that had belonged to her late husband Harold, a proud man who'd served in Vietnam and left Evelyn with more than memories. He left her with courage, and it was that courage she carried with her as she stepped out into the soft morning light. Her path to the park was muscle memory. She didn't need sight to navigate these sidewalks. The trees whispered directions, the wind warned of corners. The click of her cane tapped out a familiar song, one of independence, one of rhythm and resilience. Evelyn didn't walk for exercise. She walked for something deeper, for connection, for control, in a world that so often tried to take it from her. But what she didn't know, what none of us could have guessed, was that this particular morning would be different, that something cruel was waiting just around the bend, that a man in uniform with a badge on his chest and something darker in his heart was about to try and take the one thing Evelyn guarded most dearly, her dignity. And in doing so, he would set off a chain of events that would shake this quiet southern town to its very core. It happened in broad daylight. No shadows to hide in. No excuses to fall back on, just sunlit truth stretched across the paved paths of Franklin Square. Evelyn Grant was halfway through her morning walk when she heard the crunch of boots on gravel. Not the polite scuffle of joggers or the idle chatter of dog walkers. This was different. It was the kind of sound that changed the air, purposeful, heavy, a presence trying to announce itself. She paused, tilting her head slightly. Her cane tapped forward once, then held. "Stillness, ma'am," the voice said, clipped cold. Not a greeting. Not really, more like a warning wrapped in forced civility. Evelyn turned slightly toward the voice. She could feel the eyes on her, sharp, scanning, not seeing her at all. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied as calmly as a Sunday hymn. "Just walking. You out here alone?" he asked again. And this time it wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as concern. I know this park like the back of my hand, she answered, still polite, still rooted in that quiet dignity she wore like armor. Walked it nearly every day for the past 20 years. He let out a low, sharp laugh, not one of humor, one of disbelief. Well, that might be part of the problem. She didn't respond to that. She knew the game, knew how men like this worked. Slow erosion, not immediate collapse, disrespect served in whispers before it shouted. You should really be more careful, he added, stepping closer. World ain't as kind as it used to be. She lifted her chin a fraction. Number it's not. There was silence, tense and tight like the moment before thunder. And then let me see that for a second. Before Evelyn could react, his hand closed around her cane. It was so fast, so unexpected that for a moment she thought she imagined it. But then came the tug, the firm, unyielding pull. Her fingers resisted, but not enough. The cane slipped from her grip. "What are you doing?" she asked, panic threading through her voice. Her balance shifted, faltered. She reached out instinctively, her hand searching for something solid in the invisible world around her, and then in a moment that would replay in her mind for weeks to come, she heard it. Crack, a clean, brutal snap. Her cane. Harold's cane, the one that had been with her longer than any person still living, was broken in two, like a twig under a boot. Silence. So loud it rang. She stood there, stunned, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The broken halves of her cane hit the ground with a soft, final clatter. The officer badge. Number 214. According to the nameplate she'd never seen, but would soon come to know too well. Officer Ryan Maddox tossed the pieces at her feet like trash. "Next time, ma'am, don't get smart," he muttered, voice thick with contempt. "Some folks might not be as patient as me." And just like that, he turned and walked away. Evelyn didn't move. Not at first. She stood in the middle of Franklin Square, under a sky too blue for something this cruel. Her shoulders square, her hands shaking her fingers, reached slowly downward, brushing against the splintered wood. One piece, still warm from her grip, the other lying half in the grass, exposed like a wound. People were nearby. She could hear them, the whispers, the silence, the discomfort, the complicity. No one said a word. She knelt slowly, painfully, and gathered the remains. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the violation, the humiliation, and yet she stood. Evelyn Grant stood shaking, yes, but standing. She didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't curse the heavens. She did what she had always done. She walked 1 foot at a time, step by trembling step, palms out, feeling the air, guiding herself by memory, by faith, by sheer will. Past the bench under the oak tree, past the bakery, past the place where someone should have helped but didn't, all the way home. And when she got there, she wrapped the two halves of her cane in an old linen napkin and placed them gently on the kitchen table like a broken heirloom. She sat beside them and waited for the shaking to stop, for her breath to steady, for the weight of what had just happened to settle into the corners of her house like dust. She didn't call anyone, not at first, but she didn't have to. Marcus Bennett, the young man who ran the coffee cart near the bridge, had seen it all. His hands had trembled on the coffee cups. He hadn't intervened. He was 19, scared, and still learning how to carry the weight of being a black man in a white man's world, but he had done something else. He had recorded it quietly, shakily on his phone. He hadn't meant to capture something historic. He just knew what was coming, felt wrong. And he pressed record before Officer Maddox ever opened his mouth. Later that day, when he walked the half-mile to Evelyn's house and knocked on her door, she didn't say a word when he held out the phone. He played the video, she listened. Every word, every moment, every splintering second of the cane being snapped. When it ended, she closed her eyes. Marcus whispered, "I'm so sorry." She nodded once and said, "It's not your fault." Then after a long silence, she added softly, "But it is someone's." She listened. Every word, every moment, every splintering second of the cane being snapped. When it ended, she closed her eyes. Marcus whispered, "I'm so sorry." She nodded once and said, "It's not your fault." Then after a long silence, she added softly, "But it is someone's." What neither of them knew, what not even Officer Maddox could have imagined, was that this act committed with smug impunity under a bright Georgia sky had just set something powerful in motion. Not rage, not revenge reckoning, because Evelyn Grant had a son. 3 days had passed since the incident at Franklin Square, and the neighborhood hadn't quite returned to normal. People were talking, but in hushed voices, some offered Evelyn sideways glances of pity. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Silence, it turned out, had many shapes. Evelyn hadn't left the house since her broken cane lay on the mantel, now placed like a relic, half memorial, half warning. Her son, Jordan Grant, still hadn't come home from D.C., though she knew the moment she told him he would. She just hadn't decided if she wanted to light that match yet. But then came the knock. It was firm, purposeful. Evelyn paused mid-step, one hand on the wall, the other steadying a mug of chamomile tea. She hadn't expected anyone. Another knock, this one louder. She made her way to the door, breath tight in her chest. "Who is it?" she called. A woman's voice answered, "Mrs. Grant, my name is Detective Simone Carter with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I'd like to speak with you. May I come in?" Evelyn hesitated. She hadn't called the GBI. Had Marcus She opened the door a crack enough to see the woman's silhouette. Tall, mid-40s, dressed plain but with purpose. A badge hung from a leather necklace around her neck. "What's this about?" Evelyn asked. There was a complaint filed about Officer Ryan Maddox. The woman said, "He's being investigated for excessive use of force, but that's not why I'm here." Evelyn opened the door a little wider. "Then what is—" The detective stepped closer, voice lowered. "Because you're not the first, Mrs. Grant. I've got 3 complaints in the last year. Same officer, different victims, but none of them stuck. No footage, no witnesses. But now," she gestured subtly toward the house, "now we have you, and I hear there's a video." Evelyn's breath caught. Marcus Detective Carter continued, "I'm going to be honest with you. If you decide to testify, this isn't going to be easy. Officer Maddox is protected. He's got friends in all the right places and enemies in all the wrong ones. But if you're willing, we could bring all of this into the light. Not just what happened to you, what's been happening for years." Evelyn stood there stunned. Not because she didn't believe it, but because a part of her had always known that what happened to her wasn't an isolated storm. It was part of a pattern, a weather system that had been raining down for generations. Her fingers tightened on the doorknob. Her tea had gone cold. Finally, she nodded. "I'll do it," she said. Detective Carter didn't smile. She just nodded in return, as if understanding the weight of what had just been set in motion. And in that moment, Evelyn knew. This wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. The sun over Atlanta didn't seem to shine the same after Jordan Grant saw the video. He had just wrapped up a long shift at the Department of Justice in D.C., reviewing a federal case when his phone buzzed with a message from a name he didn't know. Marcus Bennett. The message was short. "You don't know me, but I know your mom. You need to see this." Attached was the video. At first, Jordan thought it might be a scam, but then he hit play. What he saw turned his blood cold. The image was shaky, captured from behind a coffee cart, but the scene was unmistakable. His mother standing blind, proud, unarmed, and Officer Ryan Maddox looming over her like a storm. The crack of her cane snapping in two was louder than the screams Jordan had heard in war zones overseas, but worse was the silence that followed the indifference, the people watching doing nothing. Jordan didn't finish the video. He was on the next flight to Atlanta, back in Franklin Square. The streets buzzed with an eerie calm. People went about their business, but the square itself had changed. What once was a place of morning walks and community laughter now felt like a stage where something sacred had been broken. At 6:42 a.m., just as the first morning joggers passed the bench under the elm tree, Jordan stepped out of a taxi in front of his mother's house. He didn't knock. He still had a key. "Ma!" He called gently, the screen door creaking behind him. She was sitting by the window in her chair, just like always. The cane, what was left of it, lay beside her like a ghost. "I knew you'd come," Evelyn said softly, not turning to face him. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the armrests too tightly. Jordan stepped in and took her hand. "Why didn't you call me? I didn't want to bring this to your doorstep. You're doing good work up there. You've got a life." "You are my life," he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. "You are the reason I do what I do." Evelyn smiled, but there was sadness behind it. "Then maybe it's time you did it here." He didn't say anything for a long while, then quietly, "They don't know who you are. They don't care who I am, but they will," he said, rising to his feet. Later that day, Evelyn and Jordan met with Detective Carter at a quiet booth in a coffee shop just outside of town. Marcus had joined them as well, nervously twisting his baseball cap in his hands. "We've got what we need to press charges." Carter began sliding a manila folder across the table. "But we both know that with the politics in this town, it might not be enough. That's why your name matters, Jordan." Jordan opened the folder. "How so?" "You're not just a citizen. You're Assistant U.S. Attorney Jordan Grant. You were born here. You built your name on service, truth, and accountability. The moment people realize who Officer Maddox laid hands on, the pressure will shift." "I don't want to make this about me," Jordan said. "It's not," Carter replied, "but it is about what your name represents. Because in towns like this, names carry history, power, legacy, and sometimes they're the only thing that makes people look up from their silence." Evelyn sipped her tea quietly. "Your father would have been proud," she said, eyes misting. Jordan placed a hand on hers. "He gave me the name. You gave it weight." That evening, Jordan held a press conference at the community center down the street from the square. He hadn't told many people, just a few trusted local leaders, the pastor, and a handful of Evelyn's friends from church. But word spreads fast in a town craving justice. The room was full. Jordan stepped up to the podium without notes. "My name is Jordan Grant," he began, "and for those of you who don't recognize it, that's okay. But you probably know my mother, Evelyn Grant. For 30 years, she's been part of this community. She taught Sunday school. She volunteers at the food pantry. She walks Franklin Square every morning, even without her sight. And last week, she was humiliated by the very people sworn to protect her." He paused. The silence leaned in. "This isn't just about one broken cane," he continued. "It's about the kind of justice we tolerate. It's about how we treat those who are easiest to ignore. It's about a badge that became a weapon and a silence that became complicity." There were murmurs, nods. Someone whispered, "Amen." "I've prosecuted cases across this country," Jordan said, voice rising. "But this is home, and no uniform gives anyone the right to take away my mother's dignity." That officer didn't just lay hands on her. He laid hands on every woman who's ever been told to sit down and be quiet, every elder who's had their wisdom dismissed, every black person who's been told they're a threat just for existing. He held up the broken cane. Its jagged edges looked almost ceremonial under the lights. "This cane isn't just broken, it's evidence, it's a symbol, and starting tomorrow we're going to make sure it speaks louder than the silence that let it break." The crowd erupted not in rage, but in resolve. Afterward, as Jordan stood beside Evelyn beneath the wide southern night sky, she reached for his arm and whispered, "You did good, baby. You're doing it the right way." Jordan looked at the cane in her hand, the new one sturdy and strong. But he kept the broken one, too, in his briefcase in his heart, because names have weight. But stories carry legacy, and theirs was just beginning. By the following Monday, the atmosphere in downtown Atlanta wasn't just tense, it was electric. A quiet town that had long relied on whispered conversations and shrugged shoulders now buzzed with something unfamiliar: accountability. The morning after the press conference headlines spread across regional news sites, federal prosecutor calls out local officer in alleged abuse case. Son of blind victim demands justice and has the receipts. It wasn't just the content that caught attention. It was the name Jordan Grant. And behind that name was a mother of Cain and a town that had looked away for too long. Inside the Fulton County Civilian Oversight Board, there was movement like never before. The board, long criticized for being little more than symbolic, now had to act. Not because they suddenly found their courage, but because the spotlight had turned on them. The press was calling. Civil rights attorneys were circling. Elected officials were being tagged on social media every 5 minutes. And most importantly, the people were watching. Evelyn Grant had given them the reason, and her son gave them no excuse. At the hearing, officer Ryan Maddox sat stiffly in a gray suit that did little to soften the steel in his jawline. His lawyer leaned in, whispering strategy, but Maddox's eyes didn't leave the board members in front of him. He had never expected this to go so far. He had seen it all before. Complaints, dismissed statements, rewritten, and cameras conveniently failing. But this was different because he hadn't just picked on a vulnerable woman. He'd picked on a woman whose son happened to know the entire playbook. And now that playbook was being rewritten. Jordan sat across the room from Maddox, the broken cane in a clear evidence bag on the table before him. He wore a simple dark suit again. No lapel pin, no federal ID visible. Just a quiet presence. Calm, resolute. He hadn't come to grandstand. He came to make the system look itself in the mirror. Would you please state your relationship to the victim, Ms. Evelyn Grant? The board chair asked. Jordan nodded. I'm her son, but I'm also a former assistant U.S. attorney who's handled use of force investigations on the federal level. I know what misconduct looks like, and I know when systems protect it. There was a shift in the room. Board members leaned forward. Reporters tapped furiously on their keyboards. Jordan continued, This is not about embarrassment. This is not about one officer having a bad day. This is about power. Power used not to protect but to humiliate in broad daylight in front of witnesses with no fear of consequence. He played the video again. The snap echoed off the conference room walls. Someone in the audience audibly gasped. The board chair turned to Maddox. Officer Maddox, you are seen in this video removing the cane from Ms. Grant's possession and breaking it. Do you deny this occurred? Maddox's lawyer jumped in. We dispute the context of the video. My client was conducting a safety check. The object in question was not recognized as a mobility device at the time. Jordan's voice cut in firm but composed. Are you suggesting that a trained officer cannot identify a white cane being used by a blind woman? Maddox's lawyer bristled, but Jordan wasn't finished. Let's not insult this board or the public. The video is clear, the sound is clear, the context is clear. What's not clear is why this man is still wearing a badge. Outside the hearing, people gathered. Church mothers who'd known Evelyn for years, college students from Atlanta State carrying signs that read, Cane is not equal to weapon, young fathers pushing strollers, retirees in folding chairs, and one by one more stories began to surface. An elderly Hispanic man stepped forward. A year ago, that same officer accused me of loitering while I was sitting in front of my apartment. A black teenager told the crowd how he'd been stopped walking home from school and forced to empty his backpack just to prove I wasn't stealing. None of them had filed complaints before. What was the point? They never imagined it would matter. But Evelyn's story lit a spark. Now that flame was spreading, back inside the tide had clearly shifted. The oversight board began to ask sharper questions. One member, a former judge, leaned in toward Maddox. You were the only officer on duty in the area that morning. Multiple witnesses verify you approached the victim without provocation. Do you understand what the legal definition of harassment is? Officer Maddox. Maddox shifted uncomfortably. His mouth opened, but no answer came. Jordan didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply met Maddox's eyes. You did this in public. Now you answer in public. The board recessed after 2 hours of testimony. but before leaving the chair made a rare statement. "We take this matter extremely seriously. We will be recommending Officer Maddox's immediate suspension, and we are forwarding the case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal review." The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped. Others cried, and outside, the word spread fast. "He's off the force for now, at least." That night, Jordan sat on the porch of his mother's home, the cicadas humming gently around them. "You stood tall, son," Evelyn said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "You gave me the reason to—" Jordan replied. She reached over and tapped his hand with her fingers. "I didn't think I'd live to see the day someone like him get held accountable. Not in this town." Jordan looked out toward the square, dim in the distance. "We're not finished, Ma, and sometimes that's how the wall starts to crack." She nodded, silent, proud. Because today wasn't just about a name, a title, or a press conference. It was about a stand, and this time, the system looked back and blinked. The morning sun spilled gently across Franklin Square, casting soft shadows that danced between the park benches and cobblestone paths. The breeze carried the scent of magnolia and old memories. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt heavy anymore. It was the kind that follows storms. Evelyn Grant stepped onto the sidewalk in front of her house, a cane in her hand. Not the one that had been broken, but a new one carved from polished oak with her initials etched near the handle. It felt different, firmer, steadier. But it was more than just a tool. It was a statement. She was still walking, and today she would walk where it all began. The news had traveled far beyond Atlanta by now. National networks had picked up the story. Blind woman's assault by cop sparks civil rights review. Son former prosecutor holds officer accountable in landmark local case, but for Evelyn, the real shift wasn't on TV. It was in the way people greeted her now. At the bakery, someone had left her favorite scones in a paper bag with a note. "Thank you for your courage." The little boy down the street waved and called out, "Miss Evelyn, you're famous." And perhaps, most importantly, the silence that had once surrounded her after the incident, after the humiliation had been replaced by voices. Voices that said, "We see you, we believe you, we're with you." At the edge of Franklin Square, a small group had gathered, not out of protest, not out of anger, but to witness Jordan stood by the newly placed bench under the tall oak tree. A bronze plaque had been affixed to its backrest, freshly polished in honor of Evelyn Grant, for every step taken in strength and every voice raised for justice. When Evelyn arrived, escorted gently by her son, the crowd fell into a quiet hush. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. She simply ran her fingers over the plaque, letting her touch translate what her eyes could not. The crowd watched as she took a breath and slowly sat centered, proud, unshaken. Jordan stepped forward, his voice clear. "My mother taught me to fight, not with fists, but with dignity. She taught me that silence can be survival, but sometimes survival demands that you break it." He turned to the small crowd. "What happened here started with cruelty, but it didn't end there. Because of all of you who stepped up, who spoke out, we didn't let this become just another footnote." He looked back at his mother, her chin raised against the sunlight. This is not just her bench. It's a symbol, a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks slowly with grace, with purpose, and it leaves a legacy behind every step. Later that afternoon, Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, Jordan beside her. The town had begun to move again. Kids playing in the fountain joggers, cutting through the square elders, chatting on benches. But now there was a different kind of energy. Hope, respect, change. Evelyn turned slightly toward Jordan. "Your father would have been proud," she said softly. Jordan smiled. "He always said you were the strongest person he ever knew." "I just kept walking," she replied, "even when the world wanted me to stop. And now they're walking with you." He said. Evelyn nodded. "That's the legacy. Not what we survive, but what we inspire. In a quiet town once too used to looking away, one blind black woman's walk through Franklin Square became the beginning of a reckoning no one saw coming. Evelyn Grant had no intention of becoming a symbol. She simply wanted what everyone deserves: the right to move freely, to exist in peace, to be treated with dignity. But when her cane was snapped in public by a uniformed officer and the world around her stood silent, her pain could have easily disappeared into another forgotten injustice. It didn't, because her son, Jordan, refused to let it. What began as one act of humiliation led to something far greater. A community awakened, a system confronted, and a mother's quiet strength shining brighter than ever. Jordan's decision to speak out despite being a former prosecutor and knowing exactly how deep institutional silence can run was an act of love, but also an act of defiance. He chose truth over comfort. And because of that, others found their courage too. From a coffee vendor who captured the moment to a young mother who spoke up. Despite her fear, people began to reclaim their voices, and in doing so, they helped restore the one voice that had been momentarily stripped of power: Evelyn's. Her story reminds us that strength doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the steady rhythm of footsteps on a sidewalk. Sometimes it's in the quiet resolve not to back down. And sometimes it's in raising a child who knows when to say, enough. The lesson justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with people, ordinary people, refusing to be invisible. It's in standing by those who've been silenced, challenging the norms that keep systems comfortable, and choosing courage even when the room gets quiet. We all have the power to disrupt injustice, not always with noise but with conviction. So if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, even just for a moment, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support fuels stories that matter. It gives voice to those who've been overlooked and power to those who are ready to rise. Together, let's keep walking toward a future where dignity isn't conditional and justice doesn't have to be fought for alone.